right, so let's talk about subsetting data, because we usually start with a data frame, an initial data frame that we import, but we often don't really care about all the information in there. So we usually want to select a smaller portion of that data frame, and we call that subsetting. And we can do that in a couple different ways. For example, let's go ahead and take a look at this data frame here. We've got 5 rows, just a few columns, very simple. So the first dimension we may be interested in is just selecting certain variables of interest, right? So we call this selecting. So in this case, we have 2 highlighted columns, year and engines. So say we just want to do some analysis on those 2 variables, we would want to select those 2 columns, right? And this is synonymous with SQL's select functionality or R's dplyr select, if you've used those in the past. Now the other dimension we may be interested in are rows, right? So this is where we may be interested in only certain observations or cases within our data, right? So example here is we have the first row and the last row highlighted, right? So if we want to do some analysis, but we only want to include those rows, then we would be doing filtering, right? And there's actually a couple different ways that we can select certain observations. The most common is filtering. Filtering is kind of based on certain conditions. We select certain rows based on conditions. Where slicing is basically taking a chunk. Take the first 5 rows, or take rows 2 through 10, or something like that, right? So this is pretty synonymous with SQL's where function, or R's filter and slice, if you've used those. Now, often we combine these two, right? So we were talking about selecting the year and engine column, and then we talked about selecting the first and the last row. Well, we may want to do that in combination, where we are only interested in the highlighted columns or highlighted cells here, which include certain columns and rows of interest, right? So we can always work in this case where maybe we are selecting year and engine variables, but we're just trying to filter for the first and the last row. But the last thing to consider is what we are trying to do is get a new data frame as an output, because that will allow us to do some follow-on analysis. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is taking this data frame we see up here, and based off of certain columns of interest and rows or observations of interest, we're trying to get a data frame that is subsetted to look like this in the bottom. So we kind of have 3 steps here. We have, at least in this example I'm showing, we have where we are trying to select certain variables of interest, the year and engines, and we're trying to filter certain cases of interest. In the previous examples, we were trying to filter for those rows where we had the manufacturer was equal to Embraer, right? And then at the end, we want to return a data frame, right? So there's a kind of a sequence that we often do here: select columns of interest, filter certain observations of interest, and for either one of these steps or a combination of the two, we want to get a data frame in return.